Okay, guys, we are now on to a new video. Can I hear the... I can't even hear myself in stream when I turn on my stream. When I turn... Fuck, I can't say anything. Alright. How Greed Destroyed the Angry Birds. This is what we're gonna watch. Okay. The wall blinked at me. Okay. Can we just take a second to realize what we've just come upon? We've just come upon this monstrosities. Alright. So we're gonna watch how the greed destroyed the Angry Birds. Wait.
Was easily one of the most popular apps during the early 2010s. In fact, almost every single Angry Birds game was the most popular app.
I know this guy. 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 This is the guy that climbed through my window. Yeah. Now I remember. Alright. We're finna watch this video. If I have to leave for some abrupt reason.
Angry Birds was easily
No.
one of the most popular apps during the early 2010s. In fact, almost every single Angry Birds game was the most popular app back in the early 2010s. It was the staple of the up-and-coming app game economy. Unlike most other popular games like Doodle Jump or Fruit Ninja, Angry Birds really stood out because of its unique characters and immersive storyline. It basically created this whole entire universe. It was literally on its way to becoming the next Mario or Sonic. But then, the brand completely ruined its own momentum. After years of dedicated fans and success, the company completely diverted into becoming a cheap sellout and milking the brand. Horrible sequel games, bad movies, awful attempted products. The brand became a disgrace of what it used to be, and it's probably only a couple of years away from its inevitable death. So how did it get this bad? Let's cut the bullshit and get right into it. So this all starts in 2009 when a video game company called Rovio is right on the verge of bankruptcy. Over the course of 6 years, they created 50 games, none of which were successful. But then, senior game developer Jaco Islo came to them with this little drawing that he made. It was of these color birds that were super round but had no arms and no legs. And in the drawing, they were being thrown at these stack of blocks. They liked it so much that they decided to make a game revolving around it. And that drawing was the foundation for Angry Birds.
Just some night I was at home and I got the idea of this flock of angry birds like ramming through like buildings, and I made a picture out of it, and I showed that to our bosses, and they loved
The game was going to have the birds be thrown at the block structures with a slingshot, but the game needed an enemy. Around this time, the swine flu epidemic was spreading pretty hard, so they decided to make the enemy pigs. Jaco happened to have a picture of these small green pigs that were round and also had no arms and legs, and they were the enemy. The storyline of the game would be that the pigs stole the birds' eggs and that the birds would get revenge on the pigs by throwing themselves at...
What is your favorite Angry Birds game, guys? What's your favorite Angry Birds game? Type in chat what your favorite Angry Birds game is. Okay? I need opinions. The best one is Space. The second best one is Angry Birds Star Wars, and then it's Angry Birds Seasons, okay? That goes on top, okay? That is the top 3. Seasons is third, Space is second, and whoa. Star Wars is second, then Space is first. If you guys don't agree with that, you're done. You're out of here, okay? Seasons is actually a good game, okay? Seasons is a good game.
their block structures. There were 5 main birds: the red bird, the yellow bird, the blue...
Someone in the chat just said Space. I don't work with this guy. This guy's not the next High Pies. He does not work for me. You know? Trust me. Wait, hold up.
Bluebird, the Bombird, and the Whitebird, each of which having their own special abilities, and hence the Angry Birds game was born. Now the company had enough money to produce one last game before calling it quits, so they were betting everything they had on this one last shot. They officially hit the App Store in December of 2009. The game had 63 levels and cost 99 cents to download. And at first, the app was a complete flop. For 3 months, barely anybody downloaded it. Rovio realized that they needed to promote the game better, so they were able to get a small banner on the App Store. This was all they needed because eventually the app would go super viral. In just 3 months, it hit #1 on the UK App Store, and a couple months later hit #1 in the US. The game was a hit. It was very unique, silly, and addictive. Rovio decided to drop every single other project that they were working on and solely focus on Angry Birds. They saw the potential to possibly become one of the biggest gaming companies in the world, and soon enough, they would do that. App Store games were still a pretty new thing as phones, iPads, and iPod Touches were becoming pretty popular now. So it was a really untapped market, so there was plenty of room to dominate it. Nintendo had Mario, Sonic had Sega, and now Rovio was going to have Angry Birds. And they would do everything they possibly can to take this to the top. They started with
But they didn't even try to make any other franchises. They only did Angry Birds. They only did Angry Birds. Nintendo has Mario, and Sega has Sonic, but they still have other stuff. Yes, Sega doesn't really do much besides Sonic, but Nintendo does a bunch of different things like Zelda, Kirby, and Zelda again, you know?
small improvements on the game like better sound effects and having a soundtrack. But to expand the game was going to take a little bit more than that. They decided to add new levels frequently to the game. Every couple of months they would drop a
This guy over here just said they milked the out of Angry Birds. Now they really, they, now personally, I don't milk birds because they don't give me anything except the hooter bird. But personally, they should have what they could have done is they could have added freaking more microtransactions into the older games instead of deleting them. I'd rather have more microtransactions and Angry Birds saying, "Here, take my money."
new set of levels through updates, each of them having a different theme and being slightly more challenging. This was a solid way to keep users engaged and cost no extra money. They would also add new characters like Hal the Boomerang Bird or Big Terrence the Big Red Bird. The first time Rovio ever added an in-app purchase was with the Mighty Eagle. It was essentially an option to beat a very, very hard level. Yes, it was a slight cash grab, but it still introduced a new character in a very creative and unique way. The Mighty Eagle was this very mysterious, cool character and essentially was a way to beat those levels that were just too damn hard. With all the success, they decided to drop another Angry Birds game a year later called Angry Birds Seasons. It was essentially a holiday-themed version of Angry Birds, and they would drop new levels around the holiday season. By the end of 2010, Angry Birds had over 50 million downloads. It was at this point that Rovio knew that it was going to be the future, so they went all in. 2011 was the year that Rovio did anything they can to put Angry Birds everywhere. They acquired a $42 million investment from a capital firm to really expand on the brand. They dropped a version of Angry Birds onto Facebook, which took them years to make, which was a real movie-themed version of the game that was going to help promote the movie and also promote Angry Birds. This was a big deal for the company because it was their very first collaboration with a major film company, and it worked. It got over 10 million downloads in its first 9 months. And they also still continued to regularly update Angry Birds and Angry Birds Seasons. By the end of 2011, the game got over 500 million downloads. Rovio made 10 times the amount of money they made last year, and their staff grew from 20 to over 220. It was time to step it up. Pretty soon, they would drop their next game, Angry Birds Space, which had all these crazy space themes and shit. This game got a shit ton of hype and quite literally was the fastest growing app ever, getting over 50 million downloads in 35 days. That same year, they even dropped a Star Wars version of the game, which was also a huge hit. The games were just getting better and better. But it wasn't just on mobile phones that they wanted to expand the brand to. They wanted to go beyond that. They dropped a version of Angry Birds on the PlayStation device and on the PS3. They dropped a version for Windows for the Nintendo DS. They even dropped the game on like non-gaming devices, like on the Nook Color e-reader that was made by Barnes & Noble, which was like this book device. The game was just really growing that badly. The games were doing phenomenal numbers, but Rovio saw an opportunity to to make money that was just outside of games as a whole too. Merch. Merch was the real cash cow when it came to Angry Birds. On their website, they sold tons of clothing and accessories, but the real seller was the plush toys. These were in toy stores everywhere, and all the kids and fans wanted their hands on them, including me, who spent way too much money on them. One of the hugest sells was also the line of toys that they did with the Star Wars games, including Telepods, which was like their own version of Skylanders. Essentially, you could buy these figures and it would help you unlock special characters in the game. It was really successful, and this was just a few examples of all the stuff that they dropped. The merch alone accounted for 45% of all the sales that they were making. And it might sound like they were milking the franchise, and they were, but it was in the good way. They were just simply giving the fans more and more of what they wanted. Fans loved the games and loved buying the merch, so it was a win-win. And for Rovio, it was especially a huge win because they officially reached over 1 billion downloads by the end of 2012. In just 3 years from the game initially launching, they now became an unforgettable influence worldwide. Suddenly, everyone was aware and addicted to this game. Big news media companies were talking about it. Late night TV show hosts were talking about it. Even the blockbuster movie G.I. Joe Retaliation made a joke about it. Big celebrities like Kevin Durant and Justin Bieber were praising the app. There was even a fucking religion made after the game. By 2013, Angry Birds was unstoppable. But then, 2014 happened. Now, in the beginning of 2014, Angry Birds had reached over 2 billion downloads, which was a crazy mark. But at the same time, Angry Birds was exposed as being a leaky app, as apparently it was collecting personal data like sexual orientation and location. And apparently they were giving this data to the NSA and the GCHQ. The person who made this accusation was Edward Snowden. You know, the guy that exposed the government for having all of those secret surveillance programs? Yeah, that guy. Rovio tried to deny that they were giving any of this information away, but did admit that their advertisers might be doing so. It got to the point where the app was actually quite literally hacked, where the name was defaced to say Spying Birds. But this was the least of their worries, because as a whole in 2014, Rovio's profits severely decreased. That year, their revenue dropped by 73%. The reason? Well, their game was getting a little tiring. It was a solid game, but when you really think about it, it was just the same thing over and over and over again. What made franchises like Mario and Sonic last so long was because they constantly create innovative new games that are completely different. But Angry Birds would just repeat the same game over and over again with different themes. And honestly, people were starting to get pretty tired of it. Rovio was getting desperate, and they realized that somehow they were going to have to innovate their game, otherwise they were done for. Now, initially, they did try a bunch of different games that were different styles from the Angry Birds formula. Some good, some not so good. They dropped Bad Piggies, which was a game completely revolved around the pigs, where you design these contraptions to get them to the finish line. It was a genius and very creative game that did pretty well. They dropped Angry Birds Go, which was essentially a racing game around the Angry Birds characters. It was low-key a ripoff of Mario Kart, but also did pretty well. They dropped the game Angry Birds Epic, which was like this RPG combat game which did 50 million downloads its first year. They then dropped Angry Birds Stella, which was completely dedicated to the Stella character. I guess this was an attempt to get more female fans, and this one did 30 million downloads its first year. Then they dropped Angry Birds Transformers, which was the sliding shooter game, which was not really as good, to be honest. It wasn't nearly as impressive as their other collaborations. There was some slight decrease in popularity, but overall, the games were still doing lots of numbers and people were still playing them. So if that's the case, then why was there such a big drop in revenue? Well, that's because the merch sales were going down severely. The merch sales went down by 43%, which is pretty bad. Even though they were still updating the apps, dropping new games, and even opening Angry Birds theme parks, the sales were still going down. Keep in mind, merch did take up nearly half of their profits, so this was really concerning. Rovio had to fire 110 of its employees because the drop was just that bad. It was so bad that the original CEO of Rovio since 2009 stepped down that year. Rovio realized they had to somehow make as much money off the Angry Birds franchise as possible to save the company and the brand. And this began the slow, unfortunate transition into milking the series and becoming a complete corporate sellout. The desperation started to show in 2015 with the drop of some very odd games. They dropped Angry Birds Pop, which was like this very weird Candy Crush ripoff. This game got decent reception, but only got 10 million downloads its first year. They dropped Angry Birds Fight, which was this player v player game, but also only got like 10 million downloads its first year. Then they straight up dropped Angry Birds 2, which was a sequel to the original that no one asked for. Now, this game would be the epitome of what completely destroyed the series, but I'm gonna get back to that because it plays a very big role, and you'll see what I mean. Overall, the games did okay, and Rovio did reach 3 billion downloads that year, but there was a much more noticeable decline from the previous years. The momentum was clearly starting to slow down, and the problem with these games was that there wasn't really being that much added to the storyline or the characters franchise as a whole. They were just attaching the Angry Birds theme to a bunch of really cheap game apps. So much so that Rovio eventually had to fire 260 of their employees. The original creator of Angry Birds left that year, and the new CEO that took place also left after only 1 year. The company was just becoming a complete shithole. Rovio's latest attempt to try and milk the Angry Birds series would be through an attempt that no one has ever really thought of before. Now, originally when the game launched, Angry Birds was pretty active on their YouTube channel, where they would post literal walkthroughs for all the levels. This way they could give players some hacks. But as time went on, they started to post more high quality animated shorts on there. And they would even post the trailers for the new video games coming. And these videos would get tens of million views, with some of them getting over 100 million, completely organically. In 2011, they even had their own Christmas special briefly air on Nickelodeon. And with the growth of the brand, they started to post more and more of these types of videos, eventually creating their own web series called Angry Birds Toons. Now, originally these videos were quite literally only a couple seconds long and were posted weekly, but as they got more and more popular, they created more and more spin-offs, posting much more frequently on the channel. These videos were a big hit, especially amongst the YouTube children section of YouTube, and they eventually got over 7 million subscribers. But even though this show was successful and their games were doing well, it didn't really transition that well to merch sales in the long run over the years. So Rovio decided to make a huge investment to hopefully revive the brand, and that was through the Angry Birds movie. Now, this movie was in the works for several years, ever since 2012. They always envisioned making a movie, but the development of it and the vision for it got pretty shaky when Rovio was experiencing all of these issues. When they were laying off all their employees, the only departments that were spared were the ones who were working on this movie. So essentially, they were betting it all on this film. And production-wise, this thing was pretty stacked. They had a budget of $80 million for the production, and they quite literally made their own animation studio for it. And there were like a ton of names involved on the back end of this. The founding chairman of Marvel was involved. There were big executives from Illumination and from Lucasfilm who were working on it. And that didn't even include the cast, which had tons of huge names. To promote the movie, they did a bunch of collaborations like with McDonald's, Ziploc, Panasonic. They even dropped a whole line of Lego sets. Rovio was essentially putting all of their chips into this round, and when the movie dropped in 2016, it actually did pay off because box office wise, it did really well. It hit over $350 million across the box offices, which gave them a $72 million profit. It was the 6th highest grossing video game movie ever, and possibly the highest grossing movie ever made from Finland. And that's also not including all the money they made from all of these promotions and collaborations. But there was just one problem. The movie kind of fucking sucked. For one, they designed
Shut the fucking up.
the characters of the movie in these very strange anthropomorphic styles that was pretty uncomfortable to look at. It kind of really took away the uniqueness of the original character.
Okay, the movie is peak. I understand that the characters have arms, and nowadays, that's all they use. They only use the arm characters. They only use the limb characters, which is stupid. They don't go back to the original round, triangle, circle, fucking the shit that they used to do. They don't do that anymore. Which is stupid. But the movie isn't fucking bad. Okay? The movie isn't bad. I don't understand why the Blues aren't really part of Chuck, Red, and Bomb's like team. Same with Hal and Matilda. They're not like the main people. You always only see Red, Chuck, and Bomb. Yeah, the others are side characters, and Matilda's used for one of the most, but still. It's like, come on. And like Bubbles, he's barely used. Stella? You actually see Stella a lot. I should probably shut up. But Silver. The next movie is basically all about her. The second one was too much about her. We don't need only like this new character that was introduced in Angry Birds 2. Like, we don't need this. We don't need this. We just don't need it.
As a whole, the movie was really generic in terms of its plot. It had this bland, slapstick animation style that honestly you would see in all of those types of movies like Sing or Secret Life of Pets. You know what I'm talking about. It was just this super dumbed down kids film, and it was really forgettable. It really did no justice for the characters or for the storyline, and honestly ruined a lot of it for the people who loved the game. The worst one was possibly what they did to the Mighty Eagle, because honestly they made him look like such a fucking joke. But honestly it didn't really matter, because money-wise it was a huge win for Rovio because it gave them one of their most profitable years yet. And in turn, their movie helped promote their games and their merch, etc. So they were going to ride this ship till it sank. The games that they dropped from here on out were strictly in the theme of the anthropomorphic characters from the movie. Angry Birds Action, Angry Birds Evolution, Angry Birds Match. They were really trying to force the style of this new characters down the throats of the fans, but it just wasn't working. It was just so forced, and the games just weren't that good. The movie itself wasn't really good enough to have all these dedicated fans follow it forever. But Rovio saw the dollar signs and still went in that direction. They were still really trying to launch the merch and force it as hard as possible to really get in those sales and milk this cow. So much so that the year after the movie came out, they used some of the profits to build a new studio in London. This was to help expand some multiplayer online games, but it closed down after just 1 year from just how horribly it did. Rovio essentially dug themselves into this hole of having to hopelessly milk the Angry Birds series for what it turned into, so they decided to go even harder with it. And in 2019, this would really start to come to bite them back in the ass. Now, as you'd imagine, immediately from the success of the first movie, they already started to work on a second one. The movie had a lot of the same people working on it and had the same exact formula as the first movie. Because if the same thing works the first time, obviously it's gonna work the second time. And there are also famous YouTube stars like David Dobrik and Jojo Siwa to really appear to those young whippersnappers. Now, this movie had a smaller
I forgot JoJo Siwa has to be the voice of the blues. Like, couldn't have chose anybody else. Hell, what's a person that's good with kids? Put him as that. I don't know, fucking Diddy.
budget of the original film by a decent amount with only $65 million. As a whole, the movie profited around $10 to $20 million, which is a decent amount, but a very, very big decrease from what the first movie did. Rovio blamed this underperformance on a lack of marketing budget, as well as also an overcrowded marketplace, but they weren't really doing that much to help themselves either. Although, to be honest, the movie actually did get better critical review than the first movie, but only by a slight amount. This wasn't exactly a good movie, it was just a slightly less shittier movie than the first one. But this movie was not as successful as Rovio hoped it would be. They were really betting everything they had on this style and this direction. But this was not the worst decision they made that year by far, because that exact same year, they randomly, out of nowhere, just decided to remove every single original Angry Birds game from the App Store. The original Angry Birds Season, Angry Birds Rio, Angry Birds Star Wars, Angry Birds Space, every single game.
This is the worst thing that's ever happened in human history. World War II with the Germans wasn't as bad, okay? A certain topic that I'm not going to talk about, that I can't bring up, I don't want to bring up, not as bad. Okay? Even if a nuke got dropped on us, that would be better than this. Alright. Smalls is calling me again. Yo.
You just say World War II is better than the old Angry Birds game taken off the App Store?
So personally, if I had to choose for which one to happen, World War II's happening. Okay? Even if it does it again, you know. I know I wasn't there to witness it, but, like, if they did it again in 2026, I'd rather that happen than the game's getting deleted. But, you know, it just makes sense.
That they dropped before 2014 just randomly vanished.
It
No
is.
warning, no explanation, no nothing. So the fans were pissed and confused because the very thing that made them attracted to the brand in the first place suddenly just left. It wasn't until nearly 3 years later that they decided to give some sort of explanation as to why they did that. They claimed that it was too difficult to maintain and update old apps, so they decided to get rid of them. Now, how true that is,
No. That's just not true. That's just not true. There's apps that have been running ever since the 2000s, or ever since the phone got released. Like, let's think of something. YouTube. YouTube's been a thing since 2006. Since 2006, we've had YouTube. Have you ever seen Google thinking, Our app is so old, we're just gonna get rid of it. Yeah, that seems like a smart thing to do. Minecraft. How long has Minecraft been on the phone? Since 2011? Something like that? What, we're just gonna get rid of it now? All of a sudden, it's a little too old. We're just gonna get rid of it? 2016, Mario Run. That game is decently old. YouTube's older than the original Angry Birds by 3 years, and they still haven't gotten rid of it. Although Angry Birds isn't as popular as YouTube, still, it doesn't matter.
I'm not sure.
It's just a lame excuse. It's just a lame excuse so people would have something. Just a lame excuse.
But it kind of sounded like bullshit. So what's the real reason? Well, I have a theory. It's obvious that they decided to push the new games to be as profitable as possible. Well, it's probably most likely because they really wanted to push Angry Birds 2. Why? Well, that's because the app is flooded with in-app purchases.
This
This
is
game
true.
is designed in a way that basically forces you to pay money to play. You can only play a certain amount of levels before having to wait to play again, and if you don't want to wait, then you have to buy certain credits. If you lose a certain amount of levels, you also have to wait too. The levels are a lot harder, which incentivizes you to buy these special abilities to get you past the levels. It's flooded with all these ads and just overall a bunch of stuff. The app is essentially just one gigantic
The only thing I'd pay for is no ads. I don't know if they have that. I can't remember. I haven't played this game in forever. If there's a no ad feature, like for $1, get rid of ads, I would. This is filled with ads. It is filled with ads left and right and right and left and right and left and left and right and diagonally upward to the side. It's just stupid.
cash grab. And it's probably a lot more profitable to basically make people pay money every now and then rather than just having them pay one time for the game. It's a huge disgrace and a huge downgrade from the original
I'd
app
rather
that
pay
made people love the
$5
game
for the
in the
game
first
than have to
place.
keep
It's
getting these
just
ads.
so bad. And in 2021, they did bring back the original game. Sort of. They basically made an entire new app called Angry Birds Originals Reloaded, but the only way that you could play this game is by literally subscribing to Apple Arcade. You can't download it for free or for 99 cents like with the original. No. So once again, completely selling out and being a complete cash cow all over again.
guy's
But
gonna
they were making money, which was the only thing that really mattered to them.
Can I
The
be
game
going to
still
bed right
gets
now?
plays, and there are still fans of the series, obviously, but not nearly to the extent
bro,
of
the
what it
video's
used
about
to
to
be.
be
The
done.
hype
We
has
have a couple
completely
seconds
died
left.
down, and
Just
people
stay
really
here,
seem to
bro.
only like Angry Birds for the nostalgia, not really for what they offer nowadays. Most people don't really care for what they're dropping next unless they're super young or simply only cling on to the nostalgia of it. In 2023, Rovio completely sold to Sega, ironically one of the companies that they were trying to compete against, for $776 million. And recently, they actually announced that a third Angry Birds movie is coming soon. The potential of the brand coming back is extremely unlikely, as many of the original founders and people who made the app so great are long gone now. And most likely, they're ashamed of what it's become. So now it's just sad to see them try and milk the game for every single dollar.
It's sad what Angry Birds has become, mainly because of what they've done as a whole. Shout out to this guy. Shout out to this guy. Alright guys, that is gonna wrap up today's stream. It's a quick stream, 38 minutes. I will be starting to stream longer, like 2-3 hours. But for now, we're doing short streams. I could hop on later tonight, but I probably won't. I don't really want to. So, I will see you guys tomorrow because I will be streaming tomorrow and I will be ordering my computer tomorrow. Good night. I hope the bed bugs bite you unless you follow me on Twitch. Good. See you guys later. And yeah.